So once again, click on resubmit under the October daily participation and type in 3 significant points into the text box. So, day of a legislator. So this just goes over a typical day, and it mostly focuses on the House, but the Senate will do some of these things too. And this is just to display what exactly happens during the typical day of someone who works in Congress. So they start off with some type of breakfast, probably for their caucus. So all the Republicans might get together, all the Democrats, or perhaps it's a specific group within Congress. For instance, there might be a rural caucus, which represents states with mostly farming and other places like that. Or perhaps it's the science caucus. So this is made up of congressmen that concentrate on science issues, or maybe they're scientists themselves before they got into Congress. So they'll have breakfasts that they'll eat with other people that they share something in common with. And even though it's a meal, it's also meant, of course, for meeting and talking, going over their agenda, what they want to do during the day, or perhaps things that they want to work on together. So even meals like this early in the morning, 6, 7 o'clock in the morning, are not just for socializing. They're meant for getting work done. Then they'll spend time on constituency calls. And this is going back to the office and calling, emailing, writing people that have corresponded with the congressional office there in Washington or one of their satellite offices back in their home state. And the point of this, of course, is to keep in touch with people, but also make sure that they get reelected, because obviously if they ignore the voters, they're not going to get put back into office later on. And they keep lists of people and how they're registered and how often they vote. So that way, if they get a letter from some cranky guy that's really angry, but he's never voted his entire life, they're a lot less likely to send him a particular response. They'll just send something that's general, that's written as a template. So they'll spend some time on constituency calls. And then they need to spend time on fundraising, especially phone banking. Both the Democratic and Republican parties have offices in Washington, D.C., where they go, and it's like a little telemarketer room with hundreds of people lined up, and there are little cubicles where they can call to people that have donated in the past or potentially in the future, individuals or organizations, and they basically beg for money. And they need to do this constantly, not just for their own campaigns, but also to raise money for the party, because at times, because of elections and things changing, where a party is weak in the country can shift, so they need to be able to help out some individuals on different occasions. And so they're raising money for themselves, but also for other people within their party at the same time. And not only is there fundraising, but then they have to get back to the Capitol building to participate in committee hearings, because they belong to at least a couple of different committees, and they need to go through the hearings where they bring in experts and people from the executive branch and pieces of evidence and review them. And they can screen bills and possibly amend them to make them better, or go through the process of trying to kill them because maybe they're not good enough. And so that will take up a few hours each day as well. And then by noon, they'll be summoned to the floor of the House or Senate. And there, of course, they participate in daily business. They do the Pledge of Allegiance, they have a prayer said, and they go through the agenda. And then some of the first bills come up that they have to debate about. And I've already mentioned before, a House debate is limited to 1 hour each, 5 minutes or 1 minute per person. And the Senate can go on much longer. But after they go through the debates, then they, of course, can amend the bills. They can change them. And each time that somebody amends them, they have to take another vote and another vote and another vote. In the House, because there's 435 people, they have electronic cards that just go into a reader on the back of the seat in front of them. And they can punch yay or nay or abstain, which means they're not voting that time. In the Senate, though, they vote usually by voice, and so they go through all 100, and it takes quite a bit more time. But the Senate, as you know, already proceeds at a really slow pace compared to the House. But it can, because it does have less people overall. And then, of course, this type of activity in between, because the votes are 15 minutes and they'll take little breaks, but in between, there on the House floor, and especially in the House, it's really crowded. It's almost like the cafeteria, except people are standing, moving around all over the place. And then out in the hallways, in the cloakrooms where people can rest and get drinks and things like that, That's where a lot of wheeling and dealing happens. A lot of people ask for favors. You vote on this bill for me, and I'll vote on this one for you. Or if you're going to propose this amendment, why don't you put this in there too? So that way we're more likely to go along. And so a lot of activity happens in the moment to see if more and more support can be gained for a particular piece of legislation. You only need 218 votes, for instance, in the House and 51 votes in the Senate to make something pass. But obviously, a bill is going to be much better if you can get even more people to support it. And often this activity will take place until 11 p.m., midnight, 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning sometimes. And then they have to get back up for their next breakfast with a different group the next morning at 6. So it's not an easy lifestyle. It's very fast paced. You have to be good with other people. And that's why a lot of people don't like it. They only stay there for 1 or 2 terms, even if they're guaranteed to win re-election. Maybe they're popular enough, but it can really zap the energy out of people. So that is the day of a legislator. And obviously the Senate, it's different because they're representing a whole state. They don't have to necessarily fundraise as much once they become more famous and well known. But otherwise, there's a lot of similarities. And it's extremely similar to how the General Assembly works on a day-to-day basis in Harrisburg.